upon graduation, stopped doing physics, and the Lord led me to IBM research. Started doing AI research in the early days. About 7 years into that, as an interesting turn, went to Wall Street for about a decade of doing hedge fund and investments. And then 10 years ago, our family felt led by the Lord to the Bay Area for many different reasons. And looking back, I really started my personal ministry of faith work and faith tech, um, bringing that from the English speaking world to the Chinese churches in the Bay Area. And then 3 years into that, into the move, um, I felt led to just leave everything behind and start something. At the time, I was thinking about five different projects, three of which are faith related. To this day, I have yet to start any of them because within a month of my deciding to leave, other friends in the faith and also AI, like AI friends from IBM and all that, we decided to start Charit, which is the organization I'm part of now, with the tagline of AI for Faith. And that has been about 9 year journey that God has really blessed. And that organization started out with doing AI projects, but have broadened to just technology in general, like websites and apps. But then when we started to help a lot more faith organizations to think through their technologies, quite often, and this is one of those interesting learnings, when we work in organizations and companies, uh, what usually when we think the problem is technology, it's never technology, but it's always people, culture, and strategies. So what ended up is that when we try to solve real problems for these organizations, digging deeper and deeper, we realize that we need more business expertise and so forth. And so our organization had acquired or um, partner with various serial entrepreneurs and just the great business leaders. So now we're doing a lot more. Like 60% of our projects and resources are focused on business as missions, helping um, different companies with technology for sure, but then a lot of times making that opportunity to partner with them with the specific aim of creating businesses for missionaries or making things that are very easy to be franchises so that they can just do like a template to start businesses in difficult places.
Yeah.
All right.
Like for instance, you've gotten to a point not only are you starting companies, but you started acquiring and partnering with companies. One of the different companies that you decided to partner up with is Motivations AI or Motivation Code. Talk to me a little bit about what your thinking was when you guys decided to partner or acquire that company.
Yeah. So if you are curious, motivations.ai is the website, and you can trace it down. And you'll see that there are four products in there. The first one, Motivation Co, is the sort of corporate version. The last one, True Center .co, uh, True Center is the faith version. So usually, what that means is you cut away all the money making parts of the corporate world, and then you trim it down, and then you put on the faith language, and that's the faith version. And we gave that to Urbana as well as Lausanne participants. So a lot of people are familiar with that. But the really powerful one, the corporate version, actually, well, what's added is like different ways to help you make money, like what to put on resume. When you're negotiating, what's your way? Because you are who you are, like how would you angle it and so forth. But anyway, so the many of you probably know a lot of assessments, and some of you are probably diehard fans of either Myers-Briggs or Enneagram or Big Five or DISC, right? Um, and those are great. When you use those things, it seems like you are seeing a magnifying glass, using a magnifying glass to see yourself clearer. When I did, yeah, and I did a lot of these. I love to, and I in fact have a theory of all these theories and comparing them, and why they are able to do what they do. But the first time that I did the Motivations AI tool, um, it basically looked in, or uh, originally about 50 or no, 75 years ago, uh, a social scientist look in, NASA asked a social scientist to look scientifically into the question of what are the motivations in a person that will make the right stuff, right? That would make a good astronaut. And so they came up with 32 different motivations. Yeah, when you think like, oh, I'm just motivated, but why are you motivated? And so it's very finely shaped. I mean, like, very precise. And so when I did that, I actually had a personal epiphany of like, wow, that's why I did all these things in the past, or what that, this is who I am. And so it's like a microscope in comparison, really precise. And so all that is to say, like, here's a very powerful tool. And so we decided to partner with the company and first to do a faith version. But behind it, I was thinking that if you can make use of this tool, and so, for example, like if you are mentoring someone, discipling them, or even, evangelism, if you know what motivates them, you probably change the way that you would disciple or to motivate them. For example, like, in fact, the CEO of Motivations AI says, like, the motivations that, the way that someone would evangelize to me and turn me into a Christian would probably only work for like one or two other people because, I'm very specific and, very strange and no one would, that wouldn't work for anyone else. So, but you can see the potential power, right, for having this tool to really tailor that. And so almost like everyone you want to share the gospel with, for some people, you may want to, for example, if they like facts and all that, hey, you would tell them all the details and, but then for someone else, it may be about emotion and, well, you get the idea. So it was really for the purpose of, the long term, applying it for gospel and so forth. And so right now, we actually use that tool to help pastors and missionaries to become, for example, if they want to go into a difficult region and say, hey, I'm not here to so-called preach the gospel. And I'm here as a life coach or a business trainer, right? To help you develop your team and all that. And when you have such a powerful assessment, so precise, you already have a relative advantage over your competitor. And even without that much training, you are already pretty good just because you have a much more powerful tool. So,
Yeah, yeah. You heard Michelle talk a little bit about purpose, why we have purpose, how we live with purpose. What gives you purpose, and how did you figure that out, Wei
okay.
Jing?
So, basically, the that goes back to like how I became a Christian in my third year in college, and the reason was
And where'd you go for college, by the way?
so I was at Harvard,
Yeah.
and so first year I was searching for meaning of life, and long story short, I was against all religions. So with Christianity coming to my life, it's more like 不打不相识. I was fighting against it. My roommate was, became a Christian in his sophomore year. So start, arguing with him and all that. And so basically, and when I start approaching the Bible, I had a sense that it's far more, it's beyond this world in terms of like what's the voice behind it and all that. Long story short, I became a Christian, really, with the, what call it the audacity or the courage to like fight against it or, to basically turn uh, every stone. I didn't leave any stone unturned, right? Like anything that troubled me, I really got to figure out. And so during my grad school days of physics PhD, and it was in Ithaca, and so at Cornell, and so there's not much distraction, right? Like it's in Sinsan Yelin, it's in the middle of nowhere, and so I did a lot of physics, but I did more, really struggling with God or experiencing God. And I would say, and yeah, sorry that this is a little bit longer, but the thing is that in those early days, I I read probably like at least 10 different versions of the Bible. I went to the church library and there's Chinese church and they have like there are about 3 versions of the Bible in Chinese, and of course in English there are a lot more, right? A lot more, like probably 30 different versions, but I only read like 10 of them. And the good thing and why I emphasize, right, like when you read different versions, you remain interested, and when you start reading the Bible, after the third time, you know, each time, the first time you roughly have some picture, right? Second, after the third time, you start seeing all the details and how they relate to one another. And so I would say after 10 times, you know the Bible so well, and you can pretty much in your mind see all the cross linkings that you probably don't need um, a concordance or even dictionary. You probably guess things. And probably when a pastor start talking about something, you don't feel inferior. And so you may say, I have, you know, I'm a very egoistic person or I'm really prideful or whatever. But, you know, deep down, I respect every pastor and, you know, famous pastor like John Piper, you know, or whoever, right? But I don't feel inferior. I see them as equal brothers and sisters in Christ and all that. And just because ultimately the authority is the Bible. And so, and I think that's really important. So basically because of that, oh, and then along those lines, so in those early years, it's not just knowledge, but really putting that into practice. And so everything, you know, every verse that I read, and when I start meditating on them, and so I start really talking to Christ and ask Him to give me inspiration or revelation behind those, and then you know what extra. So I was really seeking wisdom. And so, long story short, basically, spending time in the Word, experiencing God, really gave me, you can say, you know, the wisdom behind the Bible. And so when it comes to oh, um, actually so among the things that I've read that I think are really impactful to me, um, if a if a young Christian comes to me and asks like, what are the different books you would recommend besides the Bible? I would definitely say, you know, first read the Bible, you know, some version, right? Better yet, read three versions first, right? But that counts as, you know, the basis foundation. But then the second book that's really useful is actually so it's called the narrated Bible. If you were to search, best to search the narrated Bible. Some people call it the chronological Bible, but that's dangerous because there are other fake Bibles that just put the Bible, cut it into 365 days, and then you know just it's a daily reading, but they call it the chronological just because there's some. But no, what you want is actually the Bible where imagine every verse of the Bible got cut out by a scissor and now you rearrange all those verses in a time sequence as they would appear like in time. And so, and very interesting. So you can imagine, right? Like in Old Testament, it would be like, okay, bad king. All right, Elijah, you know, yeah, or some prophet, you know, hey, bad king. And then, all right, bad king did this, and then this is what happens, you know, okay, punishment. And so you would see how like the different prophets, you know, paragraphs from the prophetic books would got inserted into the history. And so amazingly, then immediately, first you would see how, you know, these prophetic books would, where they happen in time. And also you will see very clearly that, wow, God's promise or God's judgment immediately happened because you are reading them in time, right? Or like Moses' law, right? Leviticus, which no one likes to read. Well, I had so much joy reading it because they rearranged it, totally organize it as a lawyer would have it, or like in Acts, right? Like it would be like, okay, Paul went here and then he wrote the book of Ephesians, and then now the letter of Ephesians would show up. So everything is shown in a way that you no longer need concordance and all that. And so that book is really amazing. And by the way, so the reason I give so much detail is that this afternoon I learned that so far that book is only in English, but right now apparently your friend James has has the Indonesian version published like just several months ago or
Yeah.
something like that.
Hmm.
So you guys are really lucky as having the second language of that book. And then the third book I would recommend, yeah. So basically, go find out that book and then get a few copies. In fact, when that first, this is how good that Bible is. During the during the busiest time of my life, when I was writing my thesis, um, and this is probably why I was like 3 months later in graduation than my wife, who's a computer science PhD. She wrote her faster. It's because during those 3 months, or let's say during my time of writing thesis, this narrated Bible came out, and when I saw its description, I grabbed it. I knew intuitively that it's going to be amazing. I spent 3 months. Well, basically, I finished the whole Bible in 3 months while I was writing my thesis. You can imagine how good it is, right? I couldn't put it down. So that's the second book I would recommend. The third book, then, now that you know God loves you and what's His heart and all that from the Bible, the next book I would recommend is The Purpose Driven Life, because it's like, well, now that I know God, I want to be with Him. And then it's like, but I'm still here. Why, what's my purpose on earth? Why am I still here? So Purpose Driven Life is great for that. After you read that and have a purpose, this is the answer for why I got my purpose, right? So, and you realize I'm very methodical, right? Like thinking through. So after that book, then you're like, all right, now that I have a purpose, how do I go and execute in this world? And so you sort of want to get the context of what is the world like. And so along those lines, I would say today you should read Tim Keller's The Reason for God. If it were 20 years ago, before that book came out, you should read Chuck Colson's the How Then Shall We Live? Oh no, How Now Shall We Live? But if you were, born even earlier, the earlier version would be Francis Schaeffer's How Then Should We Live, right? All these three books are basically at their times talking about sort of the culture, the major forces in the world. And so I think those four books would be great to set you up in terms of if you're, and then I think the fifth book is, books on discerning God's will. Yeah, without you asking, better come into that point too, because it just follows the flow. It's always a big thing for Christians to wonder, like, oh, what's God's will, and how should I discern? And all. It's always a big thing, right? And by the way, the answer to this, it's gonna be related to uh, the topics that we have today. So basically, along those lines, um, there's actually two camps. It's just that the some of the major books really make you think that there's only one camp or one thinking, right? Which is like as if wow, there's a really narrow path that that's God's will, and so you better be careful and don't go to the left and the right. And it seems like if what if you like got up on the wrong side of the bed. Was that God's will? If not, like did I start off the day already displeasing God because I got up on the wrong side of the bed, right? Like so, it's like could be so ridiculous, right? Like so that's one thing, one version, right? Like God has a specific plan, and so you better discern every step of the way, and so. But then the other direction is sort of the biblical view, like in Old Testament, is the idea of wisdom living. When you get a general sense, right, then with wisdom you live. And well, anyway, so I'll stop there. And so maybe during question and answer, I'll just see how that's related to this. Anyway.
Yeah. All right. So I'm also afraid to ask you this question, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. Kent, where are you, Kent? Should I ask him this physics question? You lived a life of physics. How does physics tie in with your life? For those who are passionate about physics, give us a physics lesson about faith in physics.
Oh. So yeah,
And
actually,
that was a question someone in Malaysia asked them, and they really found it as a very profound answer. And I would love for you to share it with this group.
yeah, so basically faith and physics, right? Yeah, so definitely like my faith, I mean, physics thinking and all that permeate through the different parts of what I do in, at work, right? So that's tied. But anyway, there are a lot of insights because having physics, so physics basically, I would say is the realm that give you the um, most interesting ways of seeing different types of systems or different phenomena and all that, and then actually have the language to describe it. And so let's just say the when I all right. So basically in Malaysia, right? Like we tie together physics so Tao, the concept about logos, right? The you know in the beginning was the word, right? In the beginning was logos. Tai Chu You Tao. This Tao and the you would yeah, basically like there's ways to connect that with the way that well there's the biblical concept, and we know that in Greek logos and all that, it highly correlates or the linking between the Greek concept of logos and the Chinese character Tao um, is tremendous, right? Like basically, like in English, you can say, oh, you either use it the word. Well, yeah, if it's the word, but then there's no concept in the word for the way. But Greek logos is actually the way as well as the word, and but then in Chinese also because Dao is could be like Dao Li, actually Dao Li, Dao Lu. So basically, like Dao has all the concepts that uh, the word logos has all this meaning and all that. So now that's already interesting. But then in physics, this is a slightly longer lesson. I don't know if we have time, but all right, I'll just pique your interest and say you connect the dots, right? So there are two um, when you are solving a physics problem, there are two ways. So, for example, like if you have a particle and it's going to move, they're in a force field, how would it move around? Everyone knows about, F equal to ma kind of description. At every point you look at what is the force on it, and then you say where would it go next, and follow the trajectory. And that's actually likened to, oh, what's this exact path that God's will, right? Like you are now here. What's God's will? What's the next step and so forth. So that's one way of describing the particle. Another way, so for some of you who take advanced physics or I'm going to talk about Lagrangian physics, which is basically like it's a different way of thinking about how to describe the trajectory. And this would be like anything's possible, right? Like you can say, okay, at this point, the velocity of zero, but the next instance is actually went here, totally unphysical and all that, and that's fine. Everything is possible. Every crazy thing, every crazy path that doesn't make sense is possible. However, every physical law that it breaks, you give it a fee, like a cop give you a speeding ticket, right? You cross the line, you make some bad thing, I'm gonna fine you. Um, and so this is basically like this way of thinking. So the amazing thing is that the right path will show up as the minimum cost, the thing that didn't break any laws, didn't pay any fine. And so you can see that how that's analogous to like wisdom living, where everything's fine, but in your wisdom, you just try not to, do the dumb thing, the bad things, and then you are on the right path, right? So let's see. Now we have yet to see the linking. So in this Lagrangian physics, actually, there's the idea of I wonder if by going forward, like I mean, no one else in the world think about this. This is just my thinking, right? So I'm not sure whether I should proselytize this crazy idea, but well, since no one's object, all right, I'll just within 3 minutes I'll point out the linkings. So in this Lagrangian physics description, you would say, okay, how would so in physics you always ask like why would you have this description and what would be a principle that allow you to come up with this? And the idea is the principle of least action. You can Google it and all that. And so essentially from the principle of least action, you actually you can derive Lagrangian physics details and so forth. So that's the foundation. And now you're like, what is action? And by the way, no one really has an idea of like in physics books, they never tell you it happened. Action is defined as kinetic energy minus potential energy, which doesn't make sense at all because you're like, when you add the two, potential and kinetic energy, that's the total energy. That's meaningful. But when you have kinetic minus potential, why would you want to do that? And what is that? It doesn't make any sense. Well, they call it the action, right? Now, this is interesting because, it was in preparation for, this week that I've been praying about. And then, I for the first time in my life, I thought through uh, interpretation, which is that, well, actually, so you sum up at every instant the kinetic minus potential, and you want the principle of least action, which means you want to at all times, have the least of this. How do you have the least of this? It means since its kinetic energy is, minus potential, so you want as small of kinetic energy as possible. So in a sense, you want you want the least activity, the least exertion, right? and then minus potential. And for this to be minimum, you want as big a potential as possible. It means, have as much conservation of your energy, keep as much energy to yourself and don't spend it. So having those two elements, what does that mean? For example, like in the spiritual interpretation, it seems like, or never mind the spiritual yet, just in life, or if someone were to practice that, what does that mean? Principle of least action. Well, when you're minimizing exertion, but keeping or enlarging or increasing your reserve, your energy, it seems to be what at least the Chinese concept of Tao is going, right. Like, for example, if forces come, like basically you bend and you bend but do not break, right? It's like water and all that. So basically, the ancient Taoism, which actually is in seeking the ultimate, so Taoism itself is just that they never met Christ, but otherwise, it points to Christ. I think you read a lot of Christian books about that, right? So anyway, the principle of least action really indicates what the real Tao is, the Chinese concept. And the Chinese concept is actually pointing to Christ, or logos and all that. So they are all related. And so I think I give you enough hints. Like, when you have physics, like a lot of interesting things happen. And so it's just a lot of joy for me to feel like, yeah, people seeking ultimate wisdom always point to Christ. And it's just enrich my enjoyment when I see everything connected. And so, well, anyway, I better stop there.
Yeah. Let me ask you a quick question. You
Yeah.
seem to be always, if there is one thing that I get, you are very intentional in everything that you do. You're very intentional in physics. You were very intentional in Wall Street. You're now very intentional in the businesses that you partner with, that you invest in, that you launch, all of those things. You're also very I'll ask you before you're also very intentional in terms of your study habits, learning, all of those things. Why are you so intentional with everything?
Um, okay. So actually, a lot of people would say, wow, I must be exerting a lot on myself, like, like trying to do this and all that, right? Well, actually, or you know, so an application of what I just said, right? Like, when someone asks, like, oh, if I'm told by God, to love someone, to someone that I don't like, and would I have to exert myself? And doesn't that principle of least action, less exertion, how does that go with practical life, right? So idea of that least action, least minimum exertion would be like, so suppose someone thinks that, wow, I'm actually like overexerting myself to like be so intentional, or try to love someone that I don't like and all that. But actually, the way to think about it is like, when I know that, so essentially, I'm actually living out the least exertion. Or upon reflection, these few days, I realized like I am who I am. Is like I'm actually living out naturally. So after I have like read so much of the Bible and interacting with Christ and all that, I have be transformed into someone who I would naturally be intentional, because I know God and I know, for example, His purpose and His heart. And so if I don't do what he says, that's actually very hard for me. So I living out very naturally. So so by loving someone, it's no longer me that's doing the loving. That would take a lot of exertion, right? But it's actually like having been transformed by Christ, or like, let's just say, suppose in the currently it's like, okay, I need to do this in prayer. I become, or I transform with the heart of Christ. Then it's very natural for me to just love that person. That's sort of like um, the action of least exertion. So in some sense, I'm practicing the Tao, or I'm practicing the way, because I have become, what Christ has intended for me. So doing all this thing is very natural. So in that sense, like, the application is like, suppose you feel like, oh, I'm asked to do something and I'm not, or like, for example, like, oh darn, I spend 8 months doing the training of RG, and I have to do a gap, and that would take a lot of whatever. Well, if you feel like you are going to do it on your own strength, don't, right? Yeah, it's going to be so tiring and all that. But in your meditation and all that, get it to the stage where you are really in line with Christ in your heart, and it becomes a stage where if you don't do it, you cannot, you'll be restless if you don't do it. And in fact, for me, it was, for example, like stopping everything and going ahead and start Cherith Analytics. That was after about a year and a half of almost like sensing every sermon to be speaking to me about relying on God and don't do, basically step away from what you have relied on, all these golden handcuff and all that. And to the stage where I'm like, if I don't do it, I cannot sleep, and I become restless. Only when I go and do this would I be actually, would I feel that I'm caught in tune with God, caught like, oh, I'm walking on the right path, or caught like the least exertion. So I
Right.
think, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. As we wrap up and I want to do some Q&A, I'm going to transition you. Jackson, can I bring you up one more time to some of these things?
Uh,
Thank you so much.
Actually, before let me get 30 seconds to at least answer the question, like, what are we in the age of AI if, the world is changing so rapidly with the resume, before I forget, right? Like, so all that would tie all of what I've been saying together. So in the age of AI, what you do no longer matters because the AI can do it better than you. And so in some sense, what the most important thing is to realize, like, a lot of times we're defined by our resume, and our resume is basically what we do. And so now in AI age, your resume no longer matters because what you do don't matter. Guess what? That's great news, because we should not be defined by what we do, but who we are. So being is far more important than doing in the age of AI. And what does being mean? Is basically about all that I said, right? Like, so being is equivalent to the wisdom living. When you have wisdom, that's who you are, rather than say, oh, what am I doing? Which is sort of like the F equal MA part, the very narrow path, and you try to. So that's doing. You constantly worry about what you should do, the next step, and all that. Whereas wisdom living is really about who you are, the being part, and that, yeah, all tied to the least exertion and all that. And all right.
Thank you so much.